Her race hunted humans for sport, now she's kneeling, begging me not to leave the arena's shadowed crimson sand of arena. Omega drank deeply of human blood, as it had for generations. Captain Jace Reeves pressed his scarred back against the energy barrier, watching the Valkyrie spectators roar their approval as another of his kind fell to the mechanical beasts. The crowd's purple skin gleamed under the artificial suns, their forearms raised in savage celebration. To them, humans were nothing more than exotic prey, rare enough to be valuable, common enough to be expendable. Jace had survived 3 years in this hell, 3 years since the Valkyrie Dominion had torn through Earth's defenses like tissue paper, harvesting the survivors for their gladiatorial games. The aliens called humans Terran wildcards, unpredictable fighters whose emotional volatility made them resistant to their advanced neural suppressors. What they didn't understand was that emotion wasn't weakness, it was fuel. The arena gates ground open with mechanical precision. Jace's enhanced muscles, courtesy of Valkyrie bio-augmentation, designed to keep their entertainment alive longer, coiled like springs. But instead of another beast or fellow prisoner, a single figure descended the steps toward the fighting pit. The crowd fell silent. Princess Vexenara moved with lethal grace, her ceremonial armor catching the light. Unlike other Valkyrie, whose purple skin bore the traditional scarification of their caste, hers was smooth, unmarked, a sign of her protected royal status. Her silver hair was woven with the crystalline threads that marked her as heir to the High Matron's throne. Forearms moved in perfect coordination as she approached the barrier separating them. "You are the one they call the unkillable," she said, her voice carrying the musical quality of her species, but tinged with curiosity rather than contempt. 732 arena victories. No other Terran has survived past 50. Jace didn't respond immediately. He'd learned that silence unnerved them more than defiance. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough from years of roaring battle cries. "What do you want, princess?" Her violet eyes, larger than human eyes, adapted for the dim light of her homeworld, studied him with scientific interest. "I want to understand what makes you different. My ascension trials require me to demonstrate mastery over a lesser species. You will serve this purpose. I don't serve anyone anymore." Jace stepped closer to the barrier, close enough that she could see the scars crossing his chest, the evidence of battles that should have killed him, especially not Valkyrie royalty who watched children die for sport. Something flickered across her features, too quick to identify. "You speak as though you have choice in the matter. You are property of the Dominion. Then your property has teeth, your highness." He smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. "Ask the last 7 who tried to master me how that worked out." Vexenara Esfer hands moved to rest on the various weapons adorning her armor: plasma blade, neural disruptor, ion whip, and something Jace didn't recognize. Each tool designed to subdue rather than kill. She was taking him seriously, which meant she was smarter than most of her kind. "You will be transferred to the Palace of Ascension tomorrow," she announced. "There, you will learn what it means to face true Valkyrie strength, and you'll learn what it means to face a human who has nothing left to lose." Jace turned away from her, dismissing her presence with studied indifference. As Vexenara ascended the arena steps, something nagged at her consciousness. The human's eyes hadn't held the wild desperation she expected. Instead, there had been calculation, intelligence, and something else that disturbed her more than his defiance. He had looked at her, not as a god princess of a superior species, but as an equal. That night, as Jace lay in his cell listening to the distant screams of other prisoners, he planned. The princess wanted to study him, to break him for her trials. She had no idea that she was about to become part of an experiment of his own, one that would test whether a Valkyrie could learn to see humans as something more than prey. The hunt was about to begin, but this time, the predator and prey roles weren't as clear as the princess believed. Lessons in steel and Spirith Palace of Ascension loomed like a crystalline mountain against the orange sky of Veltara Prime. Jace was marched through corridors lined with the trophies of conquered worlds, artifacts from civilizations the Valkyrie had reduced to memory and dust. Each piece told a story of species that had knelt before Valkyrie might. He wondered if any of them had fought back the way humans did. Princess Vexenara waited in what she called the training sanctum, a vast chamber with floors of polished obsidian and walls that could project any environment. She had shed her ceremonial armor for combat gear, sleek, form-fitting, designed for movement. Her forearms moved in flowing patterns as she warmed up, each limb wielding a different weapon. "Your education begins now, Terran," she said without looking at him. "You will learn the futility of resistance against superior evolution." Jace examined the weapon rack she'd provided, primitive by Valkyrie standards, but familiar. A metal staff, weighted at both ends. He hefted it, testing its balance. "What exactly am I supposed to be learning?" "Your place." She turned to face him, and he saw something new in her expression: anticipation. She was looking forward to this. "In Valkyrie culture, strength determines worth. You will demonstrate your species' limitations, and I will demonstrate why we rule the galaxy." The first exchange lasted 3 seconds. Vexenara moved like liquid lightning, for weapons creating a web of death around her. But Jace didn't try. To match her speed, he anticipated it. His staff caught her primary blade, redirected her secondary strike, and the weighted end slammed into her ribs with enough force to send her sliding across the obsidian floor. She rose slowly, violet eyes wide with shock. "Impossible. My combat algorithms predicted. Your algorithms don't account for intuition." Jace spun the staff lazily. "You fight like a machine. Precise, predictable, boring." The second exchange lasted longer. Vexenara adapted quickly, her movements becoming more erratic, less textbook. But adaptation without understanding was just sophisticated guessing. When Jace feinted left and went right, her four-limbed coordination became a liability. Too many weapons, trying to track too many possibilities. This time, when she hit the ground, she stayed there for a moment longer. "You're angry," Jace observed. "Not even breathing hard. Good. Anger makes you honest." "I am not angry," she snapped, then heard her own words and fell silent. "Sure you are. Your perfect Valkyrie superiority just got challenged by a lesser species. Must sting." Vexenara rose, but this time she didn't immediately attack. "How did you do that? Our physiology is superior in every measurable way. Our reflexes, our strength, your predictability." Jace set the staff aside and sat cross-legged on the floor. "You want to understand humans. Lesson 1. We don't follow the rules. Rules exist for logical reasons. They create order from chaos. Sometimes chaos is exactly what you need." He gestured for her to sit. After a moment's hesitation, she did, folding her legs in an approximation of his posture. "Tell me, Princess, when was the last time you failed at something?" The question seemed to confuse her. "Failure is inefficiency. Inefficiency is weakness. Failure is education. Every time I've been beaten down in that arena, I've learned something new. Every scar is a lesson." He touched the raised mark along his jawline. "This one taught me that confidence without caution gets you hurt." Vexenara's gaze followed his gesture. "You speak of injury as though it has value. Pain has value. It teaches you what matters, what you're willing to endure, what you're willing to sacrifice." He met her eyes. "What are you willing to sacrifice, Princess?" For the first time since he'd met her, Vexenara looked uncertain. I do not understand the question." "Then we found your first lesson." Jace stood and retrieved his staff. "Your species conquers everything, but what do you actually care about? What would you fight for if you couldn't just overwhelm it with superior firepower?" The rest of their session passed in relative silence, but something had shifted. Vexenara's attacks became more thoughtful, less reliant on raw advantage. She began to feint, to misdirect, to think like a fighter rather than a superior being dispensing judgment. When the training ended, she remained in the chamber, long after Jace was escorted back to his quarters. For the first time in her life, Princess Vexenara found herself questioning not what she could take, but what she was willing to give. Cracks in the foundation days blended into weeks in the Palace of Ascension. What had begun as Vexenara's attempt to break her human subject had evolved into something. Neither of them had anticipated a strange partnership of mutual curiosity. She studied his fighting techniques. He studied her assumptions about strength and worth. The breakthrough came during their 15th session. Vexenara had improved dramatically. her four-armed combat style adapting to incorporate the unpredictability Jace had taught her. But as she pressed an attack that should have overwhelmed him, she noticed something that made her freeze mid-strike. Jace was holding back. "You're not fighting at full capacity," she accused, lowering her weapons. "Took you long enough to notice." He leaned against the wall, studying her with those unsettling human eyes that seemed to see too much. "I've been pulling my punches for a week." "Why?" The word came out sharper than she intended. "Are you mocking me? I'm protecting you." The admission hit her like a physical blow. In all her years of training, surrounded by instructors and sparring partners who treated her with the deference due to royalty, no one had ever protected her. They had served her, obeyed her, feared her, but protection implied something else entirely. "I do not need protection from a..." She stopped herself. From a what? A lesser species? A piece of property? Jace pushed away from the wall, and for the first time, his movement seemed predatory. "Finish the sentence. Princess, I am Valkyrie." "I am. You're afraid." He stepped closer, and she found herself backing away despite every instinct screaming that retreat was weakness. "You're afraid because everything you've been taught about humans is wrong. And if that's wrong, what else might be? I am not afraid. Of you, not of me. Of what I represent." Another step closer. "You've been raised to believe strength means taking whatever you want. But real strength, human strength, sometimes means choosing not to take something, even when you can." Vexenara's back hit the chamber wall, cornered, but not by his proximity, by his words. "That is weakness. Hesitation in battle means death, does it?" Jace placed his hand against the wall beside her head, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "I could have killed you a dozen times in our sessions. Why didn't I?" "Because..." She struggled with concepts her language didn't have words for. "Because you chose not to. Because I don't want to hurt you." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. "Because somewhere in these weeks, you stopped being just another Valkyrie royal and became someone I care about protecting." The silence stretched until Vexenara broke it with a whisper. "My people would call that weakness. Your people conquered my world and turned my species into entertainment. Maybe their definition of strength needs work." Something cracked inside her, then not breaking, but opening. "I was there," she said quietly, "during the Earth campaign. I watched from the command ship as your cities burned." Jace's jaw tightened, but he didn't pull away, and I felt nothing. They were just structures belonging to a lesser species. But now, she looked up at him, her violet eyes bright, with unshed tears, something Valkyrie were taught to suppress from childhood. "Now I see faces in those fires, people like you, people who fought because they had something to protect." "What changed?" "You did." She reached up with one of her hands, fingers hovering just shy of touching his face. "You showed me that strength isn't about what you can destroy, it's about what you choose to build." The moment hung between them, fragile and profound. Then alarms began blaring throughout the palace. Emergency lights bathed the chamber in pulsing red as automated voices announced a security breach. Jace stepped back, his expression shifting to the cold calculation she'd first seen in the arena. "What's happening?" Vexenara's training reasserted itself, royal duty overriding personal revelation. "The High Matron has returned early from her conquest tour." She moved to the chamber's communication panel, her hands dancing across the controls. "She's calling for immediate assembly of the Ascension Council." "What does that mean?" The princess's voice was hollow with understanding. "It means my trials are over. It means they want to see what I've learned from my human subject." She turned to face him, and he saw his own fate reflected in her eyes. "It means tomorrow, you'll be executed in front of the entire court as proof of my mastery over lesser species." For the first time since meeting him, Vexenara saw fear flicker across Jace's features, not for himself, but for her. "And if you refuse, then I'll be stripped of my title and exiled, and they'll kill you anyway." The alarms continued their urgent chorus as princess and prisoner stared at each other across a gulf that had seemed so much smaller just moments before. The weight of Crown's Hall of Judgment could have housed a human city. Crystalline spires stretched toward a vaulted ceiling that showed the night sky of Veltara Prime. its twin moons casting silver light across assembled Valkyrie nobility. The High Matron Kelvash sat upon the throne of dominion, her ancient form still radiating the lethal grace that had conquered half the known galaxy. Jace knelt in the center of the hall, energy shackles binding his wrists and ankles. Around him, hundreds of Valkyrie observers waited in respectful silence. This was theater as much as execution, a demonstration of royal power over lesser species. Princess Vexenara stood at her mother's right hand, ceremonial blade gleaming in her primary grip. She wore the formal armor of her station, every piece polished to mirror brightness. To the assembled court, she appeared the perfect embodiment of Valkyrie supremacy. Only Jace could see her hands trembling. "Daughter," the High Matron's voice carried easily across the vast space. "You have spent these weeks studying the Terran specimen. What have you learned of their weaknesses?" Vexenara stepped forward, her boots echoing against crystal floors. "I have learned much, High Matron. Share your wisdom with the court." This was the moment they had both dreaded. Vexenara's gaze met Jace's across the space between them, and in her violet eyes he saw the weight of impossible choices. Save him and damn herself, or fulfill her duty and watch him die. "Humans," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall, "are indeed inferior to Valkyrie in measurable physical capabilities." Murmurs of approval rippled through the assembly. Jace kept his expression neutral, but something cold settled in his chest. "They are slower, weaker, and possess only 2 arms where we have 4. She walked in a slow circle around his kneeling. "Form, their emotional volatility makes them unpredictable in combat, but also manipulable once their weaknesses are identified." "And what weakness did you exploit in this specimen?" Vexenara stopped directly in front of Jace, the ceremonial blade in her hand catching the moonlight. "The greatest human weakness, High Matron. They form attachments." The court erupted in laughter, the musical, shimming sound of Valkyrie amusement. Jace felt something die inside his chest. After everything they had shared, all the moments of connection and understanding, she was reducing him to a specimen again. He should have known better than to trust a Valkyrie, even one who seemed different. "Demonstrate," commanded the High Matron. Vexenara raised the blade, its edge humming with energy designed to cauterize as it cut. This human formed an attachment to his captor. He convinced himself that protection and care were signs of affection. She spoke the word as though it tasted bitter. He allowed this delusion to make him vulnerable. The blade descended and stopped a hair's breadth from Jace's throat. But in studying his weakness, Vexenara continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every ear in the hall, "I discovered something far more dangerous." The High Matron leaned forward on her throne. "Explain." "I discovered that humans fight hardest not for conquest, but for protection. Not for glory, but for love." Vexenara's free hand touched Jace's shoulder, a gesture of comfort rather than dominance. "And I learned that this makes them stronger than us, not weaker." The hall fell silent. Even the ambient hum of the palace's systems seemed to pause. "I learned," Vexenara continued, turning to face her mother directly, "that we are the lesser species, we who can only take, never give. We who mistake cruelty for strength and fear for respect." The High Matron rose from her throne with the fluid menace of an apex predator. "You dare speak heresy in this sacred hall? I speak truth." Vexenara stepped between Jace and her mother, all 4 arms spread wide in a gesture of protection. "This human taught me that real power isn't the ability to destroy whatever you want. It's the wisdom to preserve what matters. And what matters to you, daughter?" For the first time in her life, Vexenara answered with complete honesty, "He does." The admission rang through the hall, like a funeral bell. Around them, Valkyrie nobles hissed in shock and disgust. To claim attachment to a lesser species wasn't just heresy, it was evolutionary regression. But Jace looked up at the princess standing between him and certain death, her violet eyes blazing with newfound certainty, and felt something he hadn't experienced since Earth's fall. Hope. The High Matron's for hands moved to the weapons at her sides. "Then you have failed your trials, daughter, and failure demands consequence." "Yes," Vexenara said simply, "it does." The energy blade in her hand flared to life, casting her shadow across the hall like dark wings. Part 5. The last hunt confrontation lasted exactly 17 seconds. High Matron Kelvash had conquered systems and crushed rebellions, but she had never faced a daughter willing to die for principle rather than live for power. Vexenara fought with everything Jace had taught her, not just technique, but purpose. She fought not to win, but to protect. When it ended, both mother and daughter lay bleeding on the crystal floor. "You would throw away millennia of evolution," Kelvash gasped, her life ebbing through wounds that would have killed a human instantly. "For a pet, I would throw away a throne," Vexenara whispered back. "For a chance to build something better." The High Matron's death sent shockwaves through the Valkyrie Dominion. Without clear succession and with their greatest military leader gone, the Empire began to fracture along ancient lines. Some systems declared independence, others descended into civil war, and a few, inspired by whispered stories of a princess who chose love over conquest, began to question what strength really meant. Jace found Vexenara 3 days later on the palace's highest observation deck, staring out at the chaos engulfing her homeworld. The biomedical systems had healed her physical wounds, but the deeper injuries would take longer to mend. Having second thoughts, he asked, settling beside her every moment. She didn't look at him, but one of her hands found his. "I've destroyed everything I was raised to value." "Good. It was garbage anyway." That earned him a small smile. "The surviving nobles are split. Half want me executed as a traitor, half want to crown me as the new High Matron. Both groups think I've lost my mind. Have you?" "Probably." She finally turned to face him, and he saw a peace in her expression that hadn't been there before. "The rebel systems are requesting audience. They want to discuss terms for a new kind of alliance, one based on cooperation rather than conquest." "Sounds like a lot of work." "It will be. Centuries of tradition don't change overnight." Her grip on his hand tightened. "I'll need help. Someone who understands that strength isn't about ruling others, but about lifting them up." Jace studied her face in the light of the twin moons, seeing not the alien princess who had once viewed him as property, but the woman who had risked everything to stand between him and death. "You sure you want a human advisor? Might hurt your credibility with the nobility. Let them question my credibility. Let them see that the future belongs to those willing to build bridges instead of walls." She brought his hand to her lips, a gesture that would have been scandalous mere days ago, but now felt like the most natural thing in the galaxy. "Besides, I'm not asking for an advisor." "What are you asking for?" "A partner, in every sense of the word." The proposal hung between them like a promise of impossible things. A human and a Valkyrie, former prisoner and princess, building something new from the ashes of an empire built on subjugation. "The rebels won't all accept it," Jace warned. "Some humans will never forgive what your people did to Earth, and some Valkyrie will never accept humans as equals. Change is messy, painful, and slow." She stood, pulling him up with her. "But it's the only way forward that doesn't end in more graves." 6 months later, the first interspecies council convened on Valtara Prime. Representatives from a dozen worlds that had been Valkyrie subjects now sat as equals around a crystalline table, hammering out the foundation of what historians would later call the Cooperative Alliance. At the head of that table sat a former Valkyrie princess and a former human prisoner, their joined hands a symbol of what was possible when strength was measured, not by what you could take, but what you were willing to share. The galaxy was still healing. There were setbacks, conflicts, and moments when the old ways seemed easier than the new ones. But for the first time in centuries, the stars held hope instead of just distant light. And in the quiet moments between diplomatic sessions, when Vexenara would kneel beside Jace not in submission, but in partnership, they both understood that the greatest hunts weren't about pursuing prey. They were about hunting for a future worth building together. The end.